Colombia. Few countries hold a name with this kind of reputation. I bet if you ask the average non-Colombian to list what comes to mind when they hear Colombia, they would say coffee, drugs, violence, beautiful women, and maybe soccer. Yet, nearly everyone we met during our travels who had the chance to visit this country expressed a profound love for its people, cultures, and nearly unmatched biodiversity. After nearly 3 months, we too would fall under Colombia's spell. So join us as we venture to find the truth behind this beautiful and diverse country. After completing our portion of Central America, we returned to Mexico and sent the truck to the city of Cartagena on Colombia's northern coast. On our second day in the country, our taxi driver told us the locals say, if you can drive in Cartagena, you can drive anywhere in the world. And after being away from the truck for nearly a month, getting back in the driver's seat here would be a good test. We made our way along the north coast to Colombia's largest desert, La Guajira, stopping in the popular towns like Minca, where we had a tour of one of the oldest coffee farms in Colombia, La Victoria. Within a few days, we were heading to the northernmost tip of South America, driving through one of the most impressive deserts we had ever seen. This region is home to the Wayuu people, Colombia and Venezuela's largest indigenous ethnic group. Decades of conflict dating back to the Spanish colonial era, as well as modern-day disputes with local industry, have left much of the region impoverished at a level we hadn't seen before, resulting in dozens of tolls where locals hold a rope or chain across the road to request food, water, or small amounts of money in exchange for passage. These tolls would be a relatively small price to pay for the stunning natural beauty the region has to offer. Landscapes that change from dry shrubland, cactus gardens, and rocky wastelands to eventually the towering dunes of Taroa. Over 3 days, we would cover nearly 400 kilometers of desert, camping hidden in the dunes along the Caribbean Sea and meeting some of the local people along the way. We turned back sooner than anticipated after running our fuel supply to the absolute limit. La Guajira falls into a sort of geographical anomaly that encompasses islands like Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao, a desert surrounded by ocean. After leaving the desert, we made our way further inland, driving south towards the district of Santander, home to towns like Barichara and San Gil, the extreme sports capital of Colombia. We made our way along the Chimacocha Canyon, Colombia's largest canyon, and while staying in Barichara, met a motorcycle traveler whose birthday was the next day, so we decided we would all go paragliding to celebrate. That night, Nikki and I found a campsite next to the paragliding takeoff point and enjoyed spectacular views throughout the evening. The next morning, after the instructors and tour groups showed up, we met up with our friend and it was time to fly. While Nikki and Red found the updrafts and landed back at the takeoff point, my pilot and I weren't so lucky and ended up doing about 1,000 circles as we slowly descended into the canyon, eventually landing next to the river.
Okay.
This was all part of the plan, and soon after, a van showed up to give us a ride back up to the top.
Tornado hit.
Yeah, what happened?
Well, you know.
You went off trail.
Off-roading.
Good, apparently.
Yeah, like
Yeah, I just landed at the bottom and had this world's slowest collectivo drive us up.
Paragliding is surprisingly exhausting, so after taking some more film photos, Nikki and I asked to spend the night at the paragliding place, and they said no problem. The next day, we made our way towards the town of Socorro. Camping in Colombia is actually somewhat popular, unlike some countries in Central America where there is very little camping. Here, many of the local farms, called fincas, do offer the option to camp for a small price. This beautiful spot next to the crystal clear Rio Suarez ended up being our cheapest paid camp in the whole country at 5,000 Colombian pesos per person, which translates to $1.23 US. It wouldn't be much of a trip without the truck making a strange noise again, so after poking around, I found the front diff fluid was slightly contaminated, and to my surprise, I drained it, and there was a bunch of metal chunks in the drain plug. I tested everything out and the four-wheel drive still worked okay, so I just added it to the list of issues, flushed a diff, and topped it off with new fluid, and called it a day. Once we were done, we moved the truck back up to some high ground and then got invited by some girls for soup and beers. After everyone left and we went to sleep, we woke up to the sound of rushing water. We were camping about 30 meters or 100 feet from the river and there was no rain. Yet, a flash flood came that was so strong it formed a second stream of water a few feet in front of our truck. I don't think I'll ever forget the sound of the giant boulders in the river grinding their way along the bottom. The next day though, everything was back to normal, like some sort of bad dream. At this point, we decided to try and find a wild camp. While we don't have a lot of complaints about Colombia, the lack of public land that's accessible is fairly disappointing. This makes wild camping fairly difficult, although with views like this, it was hard to complain. We were deep in the backcountry of Santander, on a single in-and-out road that led to about 8 farms. But as luck would have it, the track down to the river was blocked by a fallen tree. At this point it was getting dark, so we decided to remove the lower portion of the fallen tree and drag it out with the truck. The top of the tree was wedged in the remaining trees on the other side of the road, and at too awkward an angle and high position to remove with the axe. We tried to squeeze the truck through over and over, but it ended up just being a few inches too tall every time. We weighed our options and decided to turn back and find a spot on one of the roadside pullouts. This area of Colombia is actually fairly safe, and with the road only leading to a few small farms, we had no traffic coming by throughout the night. We did, however, run out of propane. Getting propane in Colombia proved to be not so easy, although possible. And luckily back in Belize, Alan had given us a bottle of alcohol, and I had a tiny alcohol stove that I kept. It was enough to make a coffee. On our way out from this spot, we came across the biggest worm we had ever seen.
I didn't even know worms get this big. Look at the size of this thing, man. Jesus.
We were in need of a shower at this point, so we headed to a small town called Guadalupe. These small colonial-style towns are scattered all over Colombia, all following the same layout of a center square with a church and a grid system expanding out from the center. Guadalupe is home to a pretty famous spot called Las Guachas, a river with round pools carved out of the rock from thousands of years of erosion. From Las Guachas, we made our way to the Cascada de los Caballeros, the waterfall of the gentlemen. I think what surprised me the most was that all of this was free. Next on our list was Ventanas de Tisquizoque, a waterfall that comes out of a cave overlooking the town of Florian. The road here would take us through a unique landscape that reminded us somewhat of Southeast Asia, with jagged exposed rock walls and towers scattered along the valley and mountains. To add to this effect, we were surprised to see the occasional peacock walking around. Running low on daylight, we found an old little quarry on the side of a quiet country road to spend the night, and made our way to the cave in the morning. What else shocked us about these parts of Colombia was the lack of mosquitoes and bugs in general, although there was still the occasional reminder we were in the jungle. The bridge across to the cave was down, but with it just being the end of the dry season, there was only a little water in the river, and we followed it into the cave. This was a seriously impressive cave system, complete with little rock walls and a rope bridge, giving off some major Lord of the Rings vibes. Unfortunately, it was still fairly dry when we were there, and the waterfall was just a trickle. Even so, this was an absolutely stunning spot to spend the morning. On the way back, we took a different route, discovering more of the rock art made around this cave. Nikki then decided it would be faster to fall down the 10-foot ledge rather than climb down.
Dust to shoot. Oh no. Oh no.
The roads here were mostly dirt and pretty dusty, so we decided to make our way towards Bogota at this point because the list of issues with the truck was pretty major, and there were some things that we just couldn't put off anymore. On the way to Bogota, we would pass through a semi-desert near the Villa de Levia. Here we were able to find some camping after driving up some service roads to a set of towers. After some more driving the next day, we contacted the guy who would help us out in Bogota and made camp on a logging road overlooking the Embalse de Guatavita, just north of Bogota.
Wow. Oh my god. Gordon Ramsay.
Shut up.
We moved further into the woods for the night and got ready to head into the big city the next day. First things first was to get the truck washed and the frame ready for paint. After all the beach driving and general exposure, it was starting to show its age a bit. While we waited, Juan took us to get some Colombian breakfast. This is literally ice cream with cheese on it. Surprisingly good, but for Nikki and I, it was definitely a bit heavy as a breakfast food. Next, the truck was passed off for undercoating, as well as getting the fenders repaired and painted too. Once that was done, the rear suspension had to come out. We had blown a shock absorber in the front and one in the rear as well, and the rear springs were way too soft for all the weight we were running. Luckily, Colombia has 70 series Land Cruisers everywhere, and Juan was able to source some parts for the rear. The bushings were also shot, so we had them sent off to a shop where they make new bushings out of recycled tires same day. The shop also let us sleep on the lift while the rear axle was disconnected. We had some small other things fixed too in the meantime. Our ladder was broken, so we had it welded. In La Guajira, we had a nail puncture the tire as we were entering the desert, and I had patched it about 3 times in the last 2 weeks because it would eventually start leaking again. We also had the door handle on Nikki's side fixed because it was only able to open from the inside. But the biggest game changer, besides not having to drive on 2 blown out shock absorbers, was having a small custom roof basket built for about $70 that would fit in front of the roof tent. We had it made to the dimensions of a common fuel jerry can, and this was for the long remote stretches like La Guajira and upcoming Peru. We would be able to hold much more fuel. Also, with fuel costs varying as much as 2 to 3 times between some South American countries, this setup would pay itself off relatively quickly. It would take 3 days for this basket to be built, so it gave us some time to go explore Bogota. Like always, our phone ran out of data while driving, so we ended up using the iOverlander maps to find a place. But eventually we found the cheapest possible room in a hostel for something like $7. This was of course a room underground and a bar that we had to walk down a bunch of graffitied alleyways to get to. We went to a local market in the city, and there was a guy taking pictures with what he told us was his great-grandfather's old camera, so we had one taken of us. Otherwise, Bogota is split up into sectors, meaning all the car parts and mechanics are in one area, then an entire area just for electronics, same with furniture, and so on. Like every major city, there's lots of restaurants and a good amount of nightlife, but with our trip being focused more on the natural side, we left the city once our tasks were complete. We decided to go slightly north to also visit Medellin, because how can you visit Colombia without seeing Medellin? On the way we drove some back roads around Los Nevados National Park, home to Nevado de Ruiz, Colombia's largest volcano. This road would be one of the most beautiful drives in Colombia. As you drive above 4,000 meters, or 13,000 feet, the landscape once again changes completely, suddenly looking more like Iceland than Colombia. We stopped at alpine lakes and rivers along the way, taking in the cool and fresh air. But we weren't really here for the lakes, or the rivers, or even the volcano. No. This part of Colombia is home to something more special than all of that. On the side of the road you'll find a locked gate, and after speaking to a very small man who will tell you at least 10 times that you cannot camp beyond the gate, and to only turn right, he'll let you in for a small fee of about $3 per person. Here, you'll drive through the stunning hillside of the high-altitude alpine grasslands of the northern Andes, known as the Paramo, surrounded by thousands of frailejones, plants that are only found above 3,000 meters of elevation and look like they could be from another planet. But this would all only be a precursor to the main event, because as you come down the mountainside, you'll see the rising steam from not just a hot spring, but an entire natural thermal river.
The water is crystal clear, huh? Wow. It's so cool, you just like go find your own like little hole.
This was easily one of the most beautiful spots we've been to, something we seemingly couldn't stop saying every other day in Colombia. The truck seemed to be pretty miserable at this elevation, so I messed around with a few things and fixed a broken wire on the fuel sensor. It seemed to help somewhat, and we continued on towards the city of Manizales. Here, we would sit down for nearly a week to get started on a La Guajira video, because I had literally run out of money. This video, and about 80% of the footage from northern Colombia, would then be completely lost after dropping the hard drive it was on in Medellin. On the bright side, this beautiful property, owned by a lady named Patricia, would be a great break for us from all the moving around. We also met a Dutch couple who had just spent a year driving up from Argentina, and got an idea of what South America had in store for us in the future. We were now in October, and the rainy season was starting to show itself a little bit more every day. Before we knew it, a week had gone by, and we decided to head into Medellin to find some inside space to do a voiceover for the now finished La Guajira video. First, we would take a back road to the town of Jardin. The main highways in Colombia are typically in great shape, but have frequent tolls, one of our only other complaints with this fantastic country. Google Maps ended up doing us a huge favor though, as we drove through forests dotted with beautiful purple trees. This road also had countless streams and little waterfalls along it, which we used to our advantage to fill up on our cooking and cleaning water. Soon, the town was peeking out through the clouds in the valley below. Eventually, we made it to the town, characterized by its colorful buildings and unique church with silver towers. This town is beautiful, and we decided to stay a night, finding a hotel with a grassy parking lot for a sort of urban camp. This town is also a favorite for Colombian tourists as well, and they really do take great pride in keeping it pristine and beautiful. No peeling paint or garbage anywhere, and even going as far as trying to disguise the cell phone tower as a tree. We spent some time walking around and enjoying the local cafes, and then the next day it was time to head to Medellin. The road to Medellin would take us past Cerro Tusa, an extremely triangular mountain, which is also portrayed on every sack of coffee exported from Colombia, as it is the logo of the National Coffee Growers Federation. Before we knew it, we were in the other big city. It was at this point while staying in the Airbnb, I would drop the hard drive and lose almost all of our footage. We took the hard drive to a data recovery center, and the wait was on. First, we stayed around the city, checking out the famous nightlife, but then decided to head to nearby Guatape, the Lake District, where we would be able to camp and save some money. This is El Poblado, the party and nightlife tourist center of Medellin, complete with women of the night walking around finding customers, as well as pretty much everything else you could imagine. But as I said, we were heading to the Guatape Lake District, also famous for a giant rock that sticks out of the ground. This area actually looks in a lot of ways similar to Canada. Finally, we were at Guatape Lake, at the end of a dirt road. We ended up staying here for a few days. It rained, we painted, and we waited. The nice thing about camping next to water is you can filter it, and your only limitation is how much food you have and your will to stay. Finally, it was time to head back to Medellin to get the repair center a donor hard drive. Frustrated and demoralized, we decided to treat ourselves to not the cheapest place we could possibly find for once, but rather a unique hostel that functions more as a bed and breakfast called the Secret Buddha. You kind of have to be there to see it all. Mariano, the owner, is a well-traveled guy who collected lots of different items over his travels. This is the type of place where the more you look, the more you see. We ended up staying here for a few days, and on one of the days we took the above-ground subway in Medellin to the Botanical Gardens and to the Parque Explora, home to Medellin's aquarium. This exhibit is mostly freshwater, showing the different species of aquatic life found around Colombia and the Amazonas. Colombia truly is nearly unmatched in biodiversity, often being ranked third on the Biodiversity Index and only being beaten out by Brazil and Indonesia. Colombia also does hold a lot of coastline and some islands both along the Caribbean and Pacific coast, which is also demonstrated in the later exhibits. After the aquarium, we went to the Botanical Garden, which is free, and shows some of the different types of vegetation found in the different regions in the country. We spent the day walking around the city, looking at different landmarks and attractions. Medellin is often considered Colombia's most developed city, and this video won't do it any justice. For us, cities aren't typically the focus of our travels, so again, once our time was up here, we left. We decided to head back to Guatape, this time instead going to a farm on the Rio Guatape, where we would sit out our next portion of waiting for the repair center. As luck would have it, the only place in the area that could fill our propane tank was waiting for a repair on their pump. So once again we were out of propane. The thing is, you'll almost never see a Colombian cooking on a camp stove anyways. They're always putting a few rocks together and making a fire, so we did as the Colombians do. After nearly another week, we were done waiting. We decided to just keep on traveling, and if they ever repaired this hard drive, they could just Dropbox the files. That brought us just south of Medellin to a town called Jerico, a lot like Jardin, a lot like all the other small colonial towns we had been to. Nonetheless, we really liked it and enjoyed the slow pace of the smaller towns. The surrounding area is mostly all farms with rough dirt roads, and in these types of areas in Colombia, you'll find that all the taxis are typically 4x4s, either old Land Cruisers, Jeeps, or Nissan Patrols. We decided to head to the Coffee Triangle of Colombia, further south, camping in a eucalyptus forest on the way down. We drove further and further along Colombia's main highways, heading for the town of Salento and to the valley de Cocora. Eventually, we made it to camp, which would be a horse ranch this time. The town of Salento is heavy with tourism, both for being part of Colombia's Coffee Triangle and for being the entrance to the Valley de Cocora. We spent a night walking around the town and enjoying the local coffee, but we didn't do the hike into the valley. Instead, taking advantage of our truck, we drove the back road from Salento to the small mountain town of Toche. Besides coffee, this is the other main attraction of the area, the wax palm, Colombia's national tree. These nearly perfectly straight palms can grow over 200 feet tall and are covered in a layer of wax, hence their name. They're typically only found between 2,500 to 2,800 meters of elevation, and due to conservation, they're illegal to cut down, in turn making for one of the most unique landscapes anywhere in the world. It would take us the better part of the day to drive this road. Along the road, there were dozens, if not hundreds of cows, and at moments like this, I wonder, do they know what a great view they have? We made it to Toche near nightfall, and the finca we were looking to camp at was closed. So instead, we made our way up to Volcanic Mud, where we spoke to a couple on a motorcycle that said they don't think cars could make it further up the road. There was too much mud. Didn't they know they were looking at a partially working Land Cruiser? We decided to take the risk anyways. The mud didn't turn out to be an issue, but the fact that the rainy season was in full swing now and it was absolutely pouring was. Luckily, at the end of the road, there was a small tin structure we were able to back the truck up to until the rain settled somewhat. We picked up a pack of candles for $1 a few days earlier, and only then realized what we were missing out on until now. We don't travel without candles anymore, because they make for a great ambiance. When the morning came, we could finally see what we were dealing with. The shack was just that, a small shack, and somehow the mud was looking more intimidating than the night before. After we had breakfast, we packed up, and it was time to head back out the way we came in. The road out was beautiful, but after days of rain, we were heading for the desert of Tatacoa in hopes of drying off. Soon, the cool mountain air was turning hot and dry, and the familiar landscapes of central Colombia were fading into the distance behind us. While there's a ferry that takes you into the desert from the main highway, we elected for the back roads coming from the north, passing through old tunnels and across old bridges. Eventually, there was no doubt where we were. The ferns were replaced by cacti and the dark earth with sand. The options for camping were good here. It was late in the evening and we decided to make camp on a small cliff, just off the backcountry loop we would be taking through the desert the next day. The desert with the mountains in the distance really reminded me of the southern US here. Next morning, after a luxurious breakfast, it was time to head out. We would be taking an established loop through the Tatacoa, through the Valley of Constellations. But even the desert wasn't safe from the rain, and within no time, the road was turning into mud. But if you ever think your 4x4 is useful, there's always a local bus to prove you wrong. As we got further, we passed by all sorts of bizarre tourist attractions. I guess weird stuff in the desert is a global trend. The road was getting slowly but surely worse, so I figured it was a good time to get Nikki to practice a bit of off-road driving.
What if I start sliding? Do I steer?
Just stay in the tracks. You're not gonna slide. Those are kind of rutted. Okay? Yeah, just stay in the tracks.
Look, your own.
I took over shortly after, and then the road actually got pretty bad, to the point we were wondering who even drove down here before and when. Like the 3 other times, our data ran out right as we entered the desert, and our maps never loaded for this area. We were following the GPS only in a direction that looked like it was leading us to the main road, but before we knew it, there were muddy hill climbs with deep ruts. Soon enough, our thoughts were confirmed. We definitely took a wrong turn somewhere. Luckily, the locals, seemingly used to this and very friendly, pointed us back in the right direction. It had turned out we had actually missed a giant sign that even had a map somehow. After some more mud, we made it to the gray desert portion of the Tatacoa. The truck did good, and we were back on some drier ground. The one nice thing about rainy season in this area is that with the clouds hiding the sun, it isn't as hot as it could be. We had lunch here and then kept driving towards the famous Red Desert. Soon, we were there. The Tatacoa is actually fairly small, and you could do the whole loop in a day. We decided to hike through the Red Desert portion without a guide, though we were warned we could get lost. I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty easy to get lost, and we sort of did. At this point, we were coming back towards the main road on a different track than we had left off on. And when we came across the corner, we were pretty surprised. We saw a truck that was familiar to both of us. The Toyota World Runner's Land Cruiser Chinook. Of course, we had to say hi. I mean, what a surprise. We moved our truck over and set up for the night. We finally had a chance to set up the now legendary Mr. Beef, a $25 folding barbecue Nikki and I picked up at a home center in Colombia. Nikki and I had actually never traveled with anyone else the whole trip, but after a great night, we decided to convoy together towards Ecuador. Even though the Toyota World Runners had a really cool truck, I had to give them a jump in the morning. No, just kidding. It was actually our Land Cruiser that by perfect timing developed an electrical issue the same moment we met. After our truck was running again, after some performance anxiety, we headed south. I have to say, it was pretty cool to follow the same truck we had seen every time we opened Instagram. Eventually, after resupplying with the idea of barbecue in mind, we made camp.
What do you think of this one?
It's nice, actually.
It's not bad.
It's a bit of a change from the cerveza.
The nice thing about Colombia is the cheaper beers are literally 40 cents each. And meat? Well, we're not in North America anymore. I'm talking literally a few dollars for nearly 2 pounds of beef. We put the barbecue to work. That night, we saw the stars and foolishly left our awnings and chairs out, which we then had to put away in the middle of the night when nearly gale force winds and pouring rain took over. We made our way south and split up for a few days to get our own errands done. We had a pretty big drive ahead of us, and we were both in need of a resupply and to dry off. Nikki and I made our way to the town of San Agustin and found a beautiful cabana for $15, where we could recover from the never-ending rain. That's the difference we found between Central America's rainy season and here. In Central America, the rain might be torrential for an hour or two and then stop. In Colombia, as our host would tell us, it will rain for 5 days straight easily. We headed to the town of Mocoa, where we would spend one more night before meeting up again the next morning to drive the Trampolín de la Muerte, Colombia's death road. That night, we met some more Colombians who invited us to have some drinks with them and learn to dance. We learned the basics of the salsa and other traditional dances that night. The next day, the time had come to drive the Trampolín de la Muerte, and after meeting up and airing down, we started making our way on the narrow road. The airing down was purely for comfort, as this road is still a main highway in Colombia, used by trucks, vans, and cars alike. The high fatality rate is from the narrow single-lane portions with blind corners and frequent landslides that have claimed lives on this route. In turn, however, we would be met with endless, breathtaking views and waterfalls all along the road. Eventually, with daytime starting to run out slowly, we decided to look for camp. It was slim pickings along this route. The first place we tried, an abandoned quarry, was too muddy. Eventually, however, we found a school that let us camp in their basketball court. Oddly enough, camping on concrete in this kind of weather was a luxury we didn't realize. The next day, after a little bit more driving, we were back on concrete, passing through the town of Sibundoy on the way to Pasto. We decided to make camp early and found a small creek next to the Laguna de la Cocha. This time we were ready. This wouldn't be a dinner, it would be a feast. We all had something to bring to the table, or rather, the barbecue. While we got the coal bed ready, Nikki was getting together the batter for a chocolate cake. Back at the paragliding place, she had made a prototype for Red's birthday, but now was the time for a production model. Once the fire started dying down, Matthew was getting some beef ready for the precursor. In the meantime, some vegetable pouches were being assembled. Once the beef was ready and off the grill, it was time to get some salmon on there. From the salmon, we went to the vegetables, and finally, Nikki's cake was done. Did you know you could make a triple-decker chocolate cake with hazelnut spread in between the layers in a pot on a propane stove? Neither did we.
There's as much as you want, so I'm just...
Oh my god! It's so good! What the heck?
The next morning, it was time for a little cold plunge and some exercise. We all decided the overlanding life was way too stagnant, And back in Medellin, Nikki and I bought a kettlebell and resistance band.
You see this?
Nothing. Nothing. Alright, turn the camera off.
So we were finally heading to Pasto, the last city before crossing into Ecuador. We did some restocking, finally got some propane, and the girls we met back in Macoa were actually from here, so they invited us out to show us around. We even had a spare room to stay in. We also got a valve stem repaired, which the guy literally pulled out of the tire while it was still inflated, rubber cemented a new one in, and was done in something like 3 minutes and charged us $3. From Pasto, we went to the actual border town, Ipalas, where we filled up on diesel in our new, not-so-trustworthy $2 jerry cans. We spent the night, and our final stop was to this extremely random church that looks like it's straight out of a fairy tale, though somewhat out of place, called the National Shrine Basilica of Our Lady of Las Lajas. And just like that, our time in Colombia was up. It's not often we don't want to leave a country, but Colombia has a place in our hearts. The kindness and hospitality was truly unmatched, and the natural beauty was something else as well. I want to sincerely thank everyone we met during our trip, and at the time of making this, we're in Ecuador. But that's for next video. As always, thanks for watching.